Thank you.
I would just offer that, it does depend on what you study as to what the cost of that particular degree is, and it ranges all over the place. It also depends for us on where the students come from. If they come from a modest performing school district, they have all the intellect in the world, they just haven't had a chance to develop and express it. They may need more help from academic advisors and from academicians than somebody who comes out of opportunity or privilege. So by major and by student, those are big factors. We've done a gross calculation, and I will admit it, it's gross. And if I was an economist, I'd probably be booted out of the professional societies of economists. But if you just look at the total dollars that we had last year from the state of California and from student tuition, and divide that by how many degrees were earned in that year, and do that same ratio over the past 10 years, you'll discover that today we're about $8,000 less per degree earned than we were just a decade ago. And if you do the calculations instead of year by year, but over a couple, 3 years together, you get the same rough number. So that gives you a pretty clear indication that we've bent the cost structure, bent the cost curve. And at some point, I think you start, in all three of our systems, the quality quotient has to not be lost. The minute we degrade the quality of education down below a certain level that doesn't bring value to the student and her family or to the businesses that hire them or the entrepreneurial companies that are employing them, then we're not serving California's future. So quality has to remain at a high level, and that to us is I know in the UC as well, and the community college is one of the variables we're not willing to move. And so then you only have variables left are access and cost and time to get there, right? So thank you.
Thank you.
In our system, it's probably the easiest of the three for the legislature to get their arms around, simply because about 93 or 4% of our budget comes to us directly from the state. So the state invests about a little more than $6,500 per full-time equivalent student in our institution, and we don't have differential fees or differential funding. So the state pays the same for a nursing student that costs about 4 times what a transfer student in history might cost. That's good for the students. I happen to think it's also good for the state. It makes balancing those competing programs difficult for us. I think the most dramatic efficiency we've seen probably in all three of our systems is during the recession. All of our systems continued to teach students above what we were funded. In our case, about 125,000 students statewide were receiving an education above the funded cap. And so our faculty class sizes increased, the lines in all of the admissions and financial aid offices got longer because we basically took more students without the corresponding revenue increases. Now, as a result of the budget getting better, hopefully those things are going to come back and balance a bit more.
Great, thank you. Questions to President Napolitano and then Chancellor White. I know, President Napolitano, there's been we've had a slight difference of opinion on how to balance the budget from the UC point of view versus our point of view. I know that the regents have approved a tuition fee hike, and in response to that, I think our Speaker and the Assembly Democrats came out with a proposal that would not raise fees for in-state students and increase fees for out-of-state students to help make up significant amount of that. I was wondering if you could just comment on what your thoughts are. And to Chancellor White, we had, unfortunately had to turn away about 20,000 CSU eligible students. It looks like in the budget that you account for with enrollment increases that you're able to sort of bring the majority of those that you might have to turn away in. Is that correct, or are we reading that correctly?
Yeah, first of all, we appreciate the Assembly's recognition that more money needs to come into these systems. And Bryce just made a very important point. We are actually, the costs of educating a student are not what is being asked for, which are expenditures. The costs are actually much greater. And it's that disconnect that has made this hearing and the issue so difficult now. With respect, however, to non-resident tuition, we're already one of the most expensive public universities as a non-resident institution. We think that there's some flexibility to go up perhaps more than the 5%, But we need to be cognizant of the fact that there is, in fact, a price point, and we may actually reduce our demand and be able to fill those seats, which are budgeted because we use that income to fund the California students that we don't get state money for. We could actually move backwards. So, but again, these are all things that are worthy of discussion and negotiation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So, Member Ting, the current number that the governor has proposed, we think will allow us to enroll about 3,000 or 4,000 more students next year than we have currently in this year. That'll be the smallest increase in the growth of the CSU in many, many years. Mm-hmm. The request to go above the governor's number would allow us to admit about another 12,000 to 15,000, which would pretty well take care of what we see as fully qualified California residential students who cannot get access today.
Great. Thank you. And my last thing is just more of a small point, and I'll let my colleagues take more questions. But I noticed that in your analysis of the funding that you receive, Cal Grants is not in there. We also look at Cal Grants as something that we give to the institutions just because that is a line item that's increased significantly over the last 5-6 years. And, obviously we are very supportive of Cal Grants. We want to keep giving more money to Cal Grants, but we also I'd want to see that as a reflection of the resources that the state's giving as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think the legislature needs to be commended on that because it promotes the social mobility we're concerned about. I would just say, let's make sure we don't double count the same dollars because they are substitutes for tuition dollars. So sometimes I see them added as if they're separate and they are really substitutes for.
Thank you.
Thank you. Somewhere Brown.
Hello to all three of you. It's good to see you here today. My question is to Mr. White. I had some visitors who came in and told me that some of the schools are actually enrolling more students than they were allowed to enroll. And if they go over that your office makes them pay a penalty. One, if they were able to, if they were frugal enough in their budgets to enroll more students, why is that a problem? And then what happens to that money that their budget is paying to your office?
Next question. So, Assemblymember Brown, nice to see you.
It's good to see you.
That was a policy of the past. It is not a policy of Tim White.
Wonderful.
So it is not an issue anymore going forward. The issue of maintaining enrollment, however, across the system is an important one. And like the University of California, and I think the community college as well, although I don't have that number in my head, and Bryce will correct me if I'm wrong, we have about 3.9% of the California students that we enroll today that are not supported by the state of California. And we do not want to go above that because then that dilutes the experience. We don't have as many out-of-state and international students as the University of California, so we don't have that added revenue stream from national and international students. So that being said, I think we want to make sure that we enroll properly relative to what is being funded in California.
I'm glad to hear that, and I really hope you will let your universities know that that's now your policy because somehow they haven't gotten the word.
Thank you. So remember, we can record that clip to have it on the record. You can send it to your campuses, right? There you go. Okay. Member Chavez.
Thank you for coming to the committee. I'm sorry I was late in the beginning. I was doing testimony in higher ed for two bills that I had for veterans, which community college and both UC and CSU. So I'm sure you'll be supportive of it as it goes through. Figure I'd make a plug. First of all, I'm interested in the issue of what we're going to be doing in the bottom-up review for the universities. As as I heard the testimony a few weeks ago, it seemed like there was a lot of confusion on the terms. President Napolitano, do you feel that we've come to closure, that we understand what we're trying to do, and what we're asking you? Because from the hearing I got, I heard, we couldn't even figure it out what the definition was. So.
Yeah, we were getting into budget weeds pretty quickly there. I think that yes, as I said to Assemblymember Ting, we are working through that, and we want to make available in the format that you need it the information that you require for your decision making. As I mentioned, it's there, it's online, but it may not be quite in the format, and we may be using the same words to measure different things, and so the ability to measure apples to apples is made more difficult. But again, I think our goal is to make sure you have what you need, and we could load U-Haul trucks with numbers and bring them up here, but I don't think that's what's really key. I think what's key is, the critical factors. What are the cost drivers that underlie the budget? Where do we spend our money? And what are the outcomes that are produced in the end?
Actually, that was a term that no one could understand, was cost drivers. Listen to everybody talk. We had 3 different definitions of it. So what am I hearing you say? This is a real clear, let me be clear on the question. Do you feel that you have an adequate understanding of what we're asking you?
I think I have an understanding. Whether it's the same as your understanding, I don't know. But I think what you want to know are what goes into the budget, what are our mandatory costs that we must pay. I think it's important that you understand what are costs that we must pay that are not treated the same for Cal State or for the community colleges, pension, for example, and some of those things. How we budget for mandatory costs, how we budget for enrollment, how we budget for undergraduate and graduate education, and of course the professional schools. So I think we're getting there, Assemblymember Chavez, but again, this will be a process as we go forward.
I look forward to the process. I think Assemblymember Ting and I were on that issue of, what are our terms, what are we trying to get to, and you just ran through a list that was a little bit different than we had before. So I'm anxious to see this come forward so that we could actually have some benefit to it, so we know what we're talking about. Chancellor Harris, the CTE is like a big issue, we're talking about it. And as you alluded to, as far as your nurses, the cost of a quality CTE program, with Prop 30 sunsetting, with wondering how 98 is going to do as far as the economy of California, and hopefully it'll go up. All people elected like to see the economy go up. But I'm wondering, what do you think the growth or the future of CTE programs in your community college?
Well, that's a great question, and it is to some extent tied with the economy of the state. The Board of Governors in November chartered a task force on career tech education and workforce development in the state, and they've been working now for a few months, having about a dozen college conversations up and down the state and a number of statewide town hall meetings to try to get a better feel for how we can support these programs over the long haul. One of the things the board has recognized is that in the feast and famine revenue picture of the state of California, what tends to happen is that in very difficult times, colleges tend to cut high-cost programs, which are often CTE programs, and then when the money comes back, They tend to add back the programs they can add back quickest in order to take advantage of the increased revenue, and those are often not CTE programs. So over time, that feast and famine budget will erode your core CTE programming. So the task force is specifically looking at a way to ensure a core level of funding for high-cost programs into the future so colleges can develop those programs, because they are expensive to develop, and then maintain them over time and aren't subject to those dramatic fluctuations in budget. I'd love to tell you we have that figured out, but we don't at this point. We're working on it now, and hopefully by September, when we bring recommendations forward to the Board of Governors, that will be one of the issues we will have our arms around.